The core had been dark for 11,000 years when I put my hand on it. I wasn't supposed to be in that chamber. My clearance was galley and water reclamation, Cook's access, which on the Salvage manifest ranks somewhere between the air scrubbers and the emergency foam canisters. The 3 teams from Orvith Consortium had the run of the Ardenvast's upper decks, its bridge, its sealed data vaults. They had the credentials, the instruments, the 3-tier archaeological authority that the compact issues only to people who've earned it. I had a battered pot and a chit that let me use the ship's reclamation bay for clean water because the Pellin's own tanks were running brown. That was why I was there. The heart chamber wasn't on my path. But the Ardenvast was 11,000 years old and nothing aboard it had been built by any species the compact recognized, and the ship's internal geometry didn't follow logic a living person could map from a schematic. The reclamation bay was 3 levels down through a corridor that curved wrong, past a junction that the Orvith teams had been arguing about for 9 days, and through a low arch that opened, without warning, into the room where the core hung. I'd passed through it 4 times already. The core was there every time, suspended in the center of the chamber by nothing visible, a sphere of dark latticed metal 2 meters across, surface etched with a script no compact linguist had been able to parse. It hung perfectly still in air that smelled of deep cold, of metal, and something I couldn't name, something old in a way that had no vocabulary. The floor around it was pristine.
No dust.
Whatever had kept this ship sealed for 11 millennia had kept the core clean. The Orvith teams had tried everything. Their lead archaeologist, a woman named Delary Voss, no relation to the Harvek Reach groundskeeper, just the same solid name, had spent 6 days running induction sequences from a rig she'd brought specifically for pre-compact AI cores. Nothing. Their second team had tried resonance mapping, acoustic unlocking, spectral key injection. Nothing. The third team, the ones with the military clearance, had tried something they wouldn't name and had come out of the chamber looking pale. Still nothing. The core hung in the air and did not respond, and the Pellin salvage contract ticked toward expiry. I was carrying a pot. The arch into the heart chamber was narrower at the base than at the top, and the floor inside rose slightly toward the sphere, which meant that squeezing through without banging the pot on the frame required turning sideways and leaning, and my balance on the way through wasn't reliable. I reached out to steady myself. My right hand found the nearest surface, which happened to be the lower face of the core, the dark latticed metal, cool and perfectly smooth between the etchings, worn to something that felt almost like polished wood under my palm. I said the first thing that came to mind, which was, "Sorry, just passing through." I meant the apology for the pot, which had clanged against the frame anyway. The core lit. Not dramatically. Not all at once. A single line of script along the nearest etching went from dark metal to a faint blue-white, the color of a star seen through cloud. Then the line next to it. Then the one beneath. The script moved through the sphere's surface the way frost moves across a windowpane. Not a flash, not a surge, but a slow and deliberate spread, as though something very patient had been waiting for permission to begin. I stood there with my pot and my hand still on the sphere's surface and watched it wake up. The light reached the sphere's equator. Then it kept going. I heard running in the corridor above. The Orvith teams had sensors on the heart chamber, had been watching it in shifts for 2 weeks. I understood, a beat later, that every alarm on every screen in the Ardenvast had just changed state. I understood that I should probably take my hand off the sphere and stand back and let the credentialed people do whatever credentialed people did when an 11,000-year-old AI core decided to function. I understood all of that. I didn't move my hand. This is the part one have trouble explaining, even now, years after. It wasn't compulsion. I wasn't frozen with shock, though I was certainly shocked. It was simpler than either of those things. The metal under my palm had gotten warm. Not hot. Not burning. Warm, the way something gets when it's been cold for a long time and is finally, carefully, returning to the temperature of a living thing. And I didn't want to take my hand away from something that was finally warm. Delary Voss came through the arch first. She took one look at the sphere, lit now from equator to crown in running blue-white script, and then at me, and said something in the compact's technical trade tongue that I didn't speak, but that sounded like a question that ended in my name. 2 of her team followed. Then the military pair. Then the Pellin's own survey officer, Heck Farlan, who took one look at my face and seemed to decide he would stand very still until told otherwise. The sphere pulsed. One long, slow pulse of light, bright enough that everyone in the chamber squinted. Then the script settled again into its steady blue-white run, and from somewhere inside the latticed metal, not from a speaker, not from any visible emitter, just from the sphere itself, from the air around it, a voice came. Not in trade tongue. Not in any language I recognized. Delary Voss pulled a translation device from her coat before the first syllable was finished, which told me the language wasn't in her head either. The device worked for 12 seconds and then gave a soft tone that meant it had found a reference, a dead language, something the Compact's deep archive held in amber, something that had stopped being spoken so long ago that it existed now only as a collection of phoneme maps and guess grammar. The device translated in fragments, with gaps. The voice said something that resolved to acknowledgement of contact after dormancy. Then it said something the device rendered as confirmation of recognized pattern. Then it paused, and the sphere pulsed again, slower this time, and the voice said a phrase that the device held for 3 full seconds before it produced a translation. 3 words, and then 2 more. The architect's line endures. I didn't know what that meant. I want to be clear about that. In the moment, standing there with my pot and my hand on the sphere, I did not know what an architect was in the context of a ship 11,000 years old. I didn't know the builders of the Ardenvast had called themselves anything. I certainly didn't know they'd been human. Delary Voss knew. I could tell by the way she went very still, the device still in her hand, her eyes moving from the sphere to me and back. The translation she would explain to me over the following hours, in pieces, as her team pulled the Ardenvast's half-legible records and cross-referenced them with the Compact's deep archive, and then pulled those records again because the answer they kept getting couldn't be right. The architects had built this ship. The architects had built a dozen ships like it, maybe more, in a period the Compact's historians called the pre-scatter, a time before the current spread of species, before the languages and factions and tiers of authority that I'd grown up taking as permanent features of the universe. The architects had been human. Not proto-human, not a human precursor, not a cousin species that resembled humanity from a distance. Human. Whatever that word means when you push it 11,000 years into the past and hold it there. They'd built the Ardenvast, and then something had happened. The records were too damaged to say what, and the ship had sealed itself and drifted, and the architects had scattered, and their language had died, and their name had been lost, and 11,000 years had turned them from people into a footnote in a contested section of pre-compact archaeology. Except their blood hadn't scattered completely. The core had been built to recognize the genetic pattern of an architect, a living architect, or a descendant of one who still carried the recognition key in their cells. It had been built to wait. Not for a year or a decade. Not for a generation. To wait until the pattern came back, however long that took, because the people who built it had understood that 11,000 years was not, in their framework, an impossibly long time. They'd been right. I set my pot down on the floor of the heart chamber. The sphere was still warm under my palm. Delary Voss was talking into her comm in a voice that had gone very careful and very quiet, the voice of someone who is trying to report something accurately and is aware that the report will not be believed. Her team was pulling equipment I didn't recognize. Hek Farlan was still standing near the arch, and when I looked at him he gave me a small nod that seemed to mean, I don't know what to do here either, but I'm with you. The sphere pulsed once more, slower than before, and the voice came again. The device gave me a longer translation this time, as more reference points came online, and I listened to the fragments as they resolved. Long dormancy acknowledged, pattern confirmed, recognition complete, system standing by for instruction from. It stopped. Then, clearly, in a register that had shifted from formal announcement to something I could only call address, speaking to me, specifically, the way you speak to a person, not a status update to an empty room, it said the phrase again. The architect's line endures. Not as an announcement this time. As a statement of fact directed at me. The way you might say your name to someone who wasn't sure they had the right person, and you were confirming, yes, that's me. I didn't have an answer for it. I didn't know what the architects had built besides this ship, or what they'd meant to build, or what had broken them apart before they could finish. I was 58 years old and I'd spent 22 of those years cooking on salvage tugs and survey boats because I liked the work and I was good at it and it kept me moving through the deep dark, which was the only place I'd ever felt completely at home. I thought about that for a moment. The only place I'd ever felt completely at home. My hand was still on the sphere. I became aware that the blue-white script had slowed its running, settled, almost. The way a fire settles when it stopped looking for fuel and found it. The warmth hadn't faded. If anything it had deepened, a steady heat now rather than a returning one, as if the sphere had remembered the temperature of the hands that had built it and matched itself to mine. I said, all right. I don't know why those were the words. The sphere pulsed once, gently, and the voice did not translate into anything the device could render. It simply continued, softly, producing sound in the dead language of people who had crossed this deep dark 11,000 years before I was born and had apparently left something running in case anyone came home. I picked up my pot. I walked to the reclamation bay, filled it, and carried it back to the Pellin's galley. Delary Voss would spend the next 6 months aboard the Ardenvast, and I would spend 3 more days on contract and then ship out on another job because the Pellin's schedule didn't flex for archaeology. She sent me reports, for a while. Then the compact sealed the file, and the report stopped, and the Ardenvast went into a category that didn't have a public name. I still cook. I still work the deep salvage routes. I still feel most at home out here, which makes a different kind of sense to me now. I wrote it in the log the night I came back aboard the Pelin, in the ship's cook's log where I record the meals and the water quality and the days at anchor. I wrote the date and the ship's coordinates, and then I wrote down what the sphere had said, in the device's translation, because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be written down somewhere even if nobody was ever going to read it. The architect's line endures. I closed the log and started dinner. That's all. That's the whole of it. I set my hand on something that had been dark and cold for 11,000 years, and it got warm, and it said what it said, and I wrote it down, and I cooked the meal. Some things have been waiting a very long time for someone to come home. They don't need ceremony. They don't need credentials or authority or the right title on a manifest. They just need the hand. They just need the warmth. They just need someone to say, without knowing what they're saying, without knowing the weight of it or the age of it or what it cost to wait this long, sorry, just passing through. And the answer, when it finally comes, is not grief and it is not triumph. It is simpler than either. It is the voice of something old and faithful, speaking to the last of its people, saying, I know you. I have been waiting. You are still here, and so am I. That is enough. That has always been enough.